Let's welcome our partners and guests. Aloha Foundation, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Where am I going to sit?
Welcome to the Regenerescence, regenerative living for a symbiotic civilization. That just happened to be the book that I just finished, of which Paul Stamets wrote the foreword. This Regenerescence that we're in is so important because it's regeneration and a renaissance of new. Around the world today, many people are thinking that regenerative has something to do with farming. Well, you're kind of right, because it does have something to do with farming, but it is not something new or trendy or a new type of skill that we're learning how to do farming in a different way. Regeneration is, at the very least, 4.3 billion years old. Right after the birth of our planet, our Earth, it's a symbiotic process of how life formed on Earth, and we eventually crawled out of that primordial soup of our Earth. And here at Davos, we're going into the second year of launching the Global Regenerative Development Alliance. This alliance is specifically for the built environment. Now you're thinking, game-changing transformations or power of regenerative economies. What does that have to do with regenerative development? Did you know that the second largest world's economy is regenerative development or development? The built environment, roads, highways, infrastructures, hospitals, schools, residential, commercial. The second largest economy in the world is the built environment, development. And regenerative development is a very, very large economy, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. There's a big overarching question that we all ask ourselves, and I've been asking for a long time now 10 years. I see my friend Harold's in the audience, and Michael, Fritz, and they also know that I've been asking this for a while from people on video. I asked them this question on video: what does a world that works for everyone look like for you? And then when I show them that and ask them that question, I start to see them stutter and fumble and start to sweat. And then they say, can I tell you later? And then I record it and I ask them a little bit later, or they come back and say a week later, a month later, or a year later, and I still record it on video. I ask them that same question. The reason I recorded it is because I thought I was going to do about 25 recordings, maybe 50, and then I would have this big aha moment. We would know what the world looked like, and it would be this viral success, and we'd say, oh yeah, that's what a world that works for everyone looks like, and we would go off and live it. I asked 3,900 people that question, and even more counting every day, and only 7 out of all those people I asked knew the answer to that question. Now, I want to tell you, I asked Michael, I asked Harold, I asked people who are authors, scientists, people who have worked for the United Nations, people here at the World Economic Forum that either have lots of money to be in certain rooms or have lots of education, have spent a lot of money to get educated, and they still didn't know the answer to that question. I think that's a big problem. I want to tell you that in a world that is changing in an exponential manner, our world is evolving and growing and changing exponentially every second of the day. If you and I, or our businesses, our organizations, only improve incrementally, we are sure to fall behind exponentially. Because you and I are evolutionary beings. We're evolving every second of the day. Even if we don't want to, we might be de-evolving a little bit, but we are evolving every second of the day. And if we're not keeping the same pace as the planet we live on, we're falling behind exponentially. That's a big problem. And that's development. That's the built environment. If we still live in the caves, but the rest of the world is talking about quantum computers, that means we're falling behind exponentially. So we need to take this quantum leap to the Regenaissance. And that's one reason I wrote the book. And also why I convinced Paul to read it a few times to give me a nice foreword of the book, because he actually believed in it. The main thing that we want to focus on here is economies, and you're probably familiar with all the classical, and since we're at the World Economic Forum, shitty economic models. Ones that have to deal with GDP, growth, neoclassical, micro, macro. They're in red because they all compete one against each other. You can't take GDP and capitalism and put them head together because they compete against each other. They're always trying to win. They don't give each other support so that they both win. They actually fight against each other, and they all have a limit to growth. That means they go a certain point and then they crash, or they have to rob and steal money from someone else. These models are also require someone or something on this planet to suffer in order for them to succeed. They're a have and have not type of economic model. But here's the great news. Did you know that everybody in this audience knows at least 5 ecological economic models? How many people know what an ecological economic model is? Oh, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Great. There are more than 32 ecological economic models in this world, and there's new ones coming out every single day. The reason they're in green is because they give each other redundancy. You can do one of these models, or you can do all of them, and what they do is give each other redundancy, they build each other up, and they support themselves for success. Those 5 that I said you knew, I'm sure everybody's heard of donut economics from Kate Raworth. Everybody's heard of well-being economics. Everybody's heard of regenerative economics. That's what this topic is about today. Everybody has heard of sustainable development goals economics, pluralist economics, circular economy, sufficiency economy philosophy. There's so many. Just in the last 4 years, there have been more than 20 books written on ecological economic models. There hasn't, in the history of economics, been that many books written on economics, let alone ecological economic models. So that tells us that we're sick of all the shitty ones, and we want to replace it with something new. The one I really like the most is Earth for All, because it combines 5 different ecological economic models into one. With that in mind, because we're going to make this quantum leap to regenerative economics, this game-changing quantum leap, I want you to watch this video and kind of see if you see a few things or have seen it before.
Electrical impulses. Every cell knows and talks to every other cell. They exchange 1,000 bits of information between them per second. Cells group together, forming a giant web of communication, which in turn forms matter. Cells get together, take on one form, deform, reform. Makes no difference, it's all the same. Humans consider themselves unique, so they've rooted their whole theory of existence on their uniqueness. One is their unit of measure, but it's not. All social systems we put into place are a mere sketch. 1 + 1 = 2. That's all we've learned. But 1 + 1 has never equaled 2. There are, in fact, no numbers and no letters. We've codified our existence to bring it down to human size, to make it comprehensible. We've created a scale so that we can forget its unfathomable scale.
But if humans are not the unit of measure, and the world isn't governed by mathematical laws, what governs all that?
Film a car speeding down a road. Speed up the image infinitely, and the car disappears. So what proof do we have of its existence? Time gives legitimacy to its existence. Time is the only true unit of measure. It gives proof to the existence of matter. Without time, We don't exist.
You're like, what in the heck is he showing us that for, Morgan Freeman? Mainly because 1 + 1 in living systems never equals 2. In all living systems, biology, ecology, environment, you and I, biological beings, 1 + 1 never, ever, ever, ever equals 2. It's always a super exponential, and it verges on quantum tunneling. That's not something I made up. That's well over 70 years old. Comes from Lynn Margulis. She was at a symposium at Lake Como, wrote a book, and compiled a lot of scientists that were there talking about symbiosis as an ecological phenomenon, as the fastest form of human evolutionary innovation ever seen. Ecological economics is based on the ecology of living life systems that take economics and environment and ecology into play. All other classical economic models, capitalism, extraction, they use our nature without accounting for the true capital or the true cost of nature. And that's the difference between ecological economics. But more importantly, ecological economic models mimic life. They mimic the regenerative process of how life works, the original life operating system. Now, I need to get a little bit deeper to go between the super exponential to quantum tunneling into quantum physics a little bit. And I'm going to get the help of the father of quantum string theory, and hopefully my video is cut to the right size. I think it is. Here it is.
Because, like I said, it's trial and error. Almost all chemistry and biology is done by trial and error.
Mostly error.
How is penicillin discovered? We discover new penicillins the same way, by accident. So we're now talking about not by accident, but systematically creating fertilizer, creating new drugs, new therapies, because that's how Mother Nature does it. Mother Nature does not do it by petri dishes. Mother Nature does it quantum mechanically.
Right. So let me get back to your earlier comment that Mother Nature is a quantum computer. Did you say that?
In that sense, yes. You go outside, you see photosynthesis taking place, you see energy being converted into useful chemicals, you see life, you see all sorts of chemical processes happening, none of which can be duplicated by an ordinary computer. That's where quantum computers can come in.
And all of it is happening like it's just another day under the sun.
That's right. So in other words, we actually have quantum computers. They're called leaves, plants, vegetation. All of them are quantum mechanical. Why did you eat breakfast this morning? It was a byproduct of quantum computers. Why do we have a green revolution? The green revolution was a quantum revolution. That's why we had fertilized crops. And that's why we have a food shortage today, because we're running out of fertilizer. That's why we need quantum computers to come in to fill the gap. A second green revolution is a byproduct of the quantum revolution.
Wow. And that would be one of the next eras that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now let's
So the reason I show that is a lot of people kind of, even though they hear it, they see it, I talk about it, they still don't get it. What he is saying is that the way we came up with quantum computing, or why we thought we needed it, is we couldn't figure out how in the hell does that plant do photosynthesis, capture carbon, heal the soils, give us food, create oxygen, and trillions of other quantum mechanical things at the same time. Oh, I think we need a quantum computer to figure that out, and what kind of nutrients it takes and the microbes, so that we can figure out how to reproduce that, so that we can grow more crops or be more fast or be more efficient. But I want you to know that plant is quantum mechanical, but you and I and birds and species and other plants and fungus and trees They're also quantum mechanical. But most importantly, you need to realize that you're one of those quantum mechanical beings. You crawled out of the primordial soup of this earth, and you're a quantum mechanical human being. You can process faster than any quantum computer will ever have the ability to do, or that we can create. To put that into perspective, I want you to know that our brain, every single second inside our brain, our neurons are firing electrical signals at the rate of 268 miles per hour. That is faster than a Formula One F1 race car screaming through your skull. And that's kind of why I did that, because this Formula One race car at that speed is actually standing still. That's how fast your neurons are traveling through your brain every second. Here's another example. It's just like, to put it into perspective, we'll go a step further. In every cell of our body, there are 200 mitochondria, bacteria. So when an infant is born, before it comes down the birth canal, there are 70 trillion human cells in the human body. Each one of those 70 trillion cells has 200 mitochondria inside it. What is a mitochondria? It's a bacteria that helps the cell collect energy, make food, so that you could take that first breath to take light and give you life. Before that baby has even come out of the canal and taken its first breath, those cells in your body have been doing quantum mechanical processes well before. And I'm not even talking now that you've come out, all the quantum things you do every second of the day. So when I mention that quote, that every second of the day, life on Earth, our Earth is evolving at an exponential rate, I'm also telling you that you're evolving at an exponential rate every second of the day. If I were to tell each one of you in this audience today, for the next 20 minutes, all you can do is breathe. Nothing else, no talking, no drinking, no walking, no sleeping, just breathe. You would be dead within 5 minutes, because you do trillions of processes every second. And it's not just the breath, it's the circulation of the blood through your body. It's your skeleton system, nervous system, and all sorts of other things that are keeping you alive in this earth. Now, I've applied this quantum thinking and processes to a process specifically for regenerative development. And it's called neuromorphic quantum computing. The difference between classical quantum computing and regular quantum computing is neuromorphic quantum computing works how our brain works. And in Dubai and around the world, we've created this world for all model for architects, contractors, engineers, static engineers to do buildings and appraisals. In a world that is evolving and growing in an exponential manner every second of the day, if we only improve incrementally, we are sure to fall behind exponentially.
The great city of Dubai, spanning approximately 4,000 square kilometers across the desert, every street is alive with human activity. Megawatts pulsating through each intersection. A living organism of staggering complexity. How could we possibly see it all? The invisible network of thousands of computational nodes scattered across the city, each one a sensor silently witnessing its pulse. This is where quantum computing makes the invisible visible. A kind of intelligence that doesn't think as we do. It exists in a superposition, exploring billions of scenarios simultaneously. Watch the nodes flickering with possibility evaluating, measuring, and scoring a scenario in the blink of an eye. And through entanglement, every variable touches another. A street rerouted in one district alters thermal comfort miles away. The orientation of a single building can significantly reshape the air across a whole neighborhood. Out of these entangled layers of trillions of possibilities, patterns emerge that are counterintuitive, elegant, and alive. This is quantum territory. But the city's intelligence runs deeper still. Every facade a living skin. Watch them pulse and breathe, tracking the sun, projecting heat and harvesting light. Each surface recalculates its position thousands of times a day. Not automation, evolution. Thousands of buildings, each one quantum tuned to balance energy, comfort, and light, moving independently yet synchronized like a single organism. Dubai, one city, infinite adaptation, quantum resilience.
So I show this to you for a couple reasons. We're using it all around the world so far on different regenerative development projects. And when you look at that over that top view of Dubai, it's a concrete jungle. To me, really honestly, they look like headstones in a graveyard. And the reality is a lot of us are living in these headstones or graveyards, concrete jungles that are soulless, they're dead, they're not alive, they're not breathing, they're not green, they're not meant the way we live. And the problem is each of those developers individually approach to have those developments go. And they do what's called, through the big 5 accounting firms and through other firms, they do what's called a feasibility study. They can say, is it feasible to build this building and have a profit and a return? And that's what they call a feasibility study, to build a building. And when that feasibility study comes back, they get this answer back that says, oh yeah, that'll be profitable, and you as middlemen or realtors can get your money out of that, and it's a good deal. So then they build the building, and then they exit out of the building, and they don't care about the environment, the people who live there, and if it's a regenerative building. This World for All model takes in all the regenerative development processes of how we can use the new innovations that are regenerative, plants, trees, oxygen, non-fossil fuels, better built environment materials, so that we can be net positive, and it runs them through a neuromorphic quantum computer. And in every second through this computer, we can process 8.6 billion scenarios, which is 11 quintillion scenarios for every 8.6 billion, or for every second. And so we're doing these 8.6 billion processes every second. And that video that we showed you, we're able to do something like 72 quadrillion scenarios just in that short time. And we only had certain weighted things. So it's like, an easy way to explain it, it's like a digital ecosystem for the Earth that gives a baseline appraisal that you could push out into the future to find out all the different scenarios. But then, as you know the accurate appraisal of that space, you can apply all the regenerative solutions to that model and run out those scenarios endlessly to find out which solutions work best for which environments and which places. And because it is a concrete jungle and so desolate, that's why we chose Dubai as one of the pilot areas to test that out. Regenerative means to create the conditions that are conducive for life to thrive and flourish amid ever-changing life conditions. So now we're going to get into the next transition, and that is, we've talked a little bit about regenerative development, but what exactly does it mean? Well, first of all, it's an ecological economic model. It's the world's second largest economy that exists, and it's a $280+ trillion economy. If we were to talk about sustainable development, that's a $148 trillion economy. If we were going to talk about regular development, it's an $89 trillion economy. But what it means is it means living design, regenerative conditions, regenerative frameworks, circular economy, cradle to cradle, and all these certifications out there, but the most important is balanced emissions net positive scenarios. We leave the planet better than we found it. And it's the built environment, roads, infrastructures, highways. These white letters down here are all, something happened, screen went blank. Screen went blank, Thomas, there we go. All these are the studies. There's been over 1,700 studies in the last 7 years on regenerative development, and that's where that $280+ trillion comes from. That's available today for developments moving in the future. So like I told you in the beginning, people would say, well, I thought you were going to talk about agriculture, Mark. All I know is regeneration has to do with regenerative farming or agriculture. So I'm going to answer that question. What is regenerative agriculture? It's also an economy, but it's the #1 economy in our world. It's the food environment, food, beverages, agriculture. It's the world's largest economy. It's a $750 trillion economy, and these figures are highly conservative, erring on the lower side, and it has actually 4 more sources than the previous slide over a 7-year study. It means all these things. So you've heard about permaculture and organic farming, but it means, first of all, removing all food from the commodities market, permaculture, microbial farming, agroforestry, perennials, carbon farming, on and on and on, that are all agriculture farming practices that give the earth back more than they take, and it's a regenerative process that grows abundantly. So, welcome to the Regenaissance, the regenerative renaissance. But as I get ready to pass the baton over to Dina, I just want to tell you that there have been more than 32 civilizations in our world before that have all collapsed. Doing what? The built environment. They've tried to build a civilization up. And there was a study done, it's called the Handy Study, done by NASA, and it was done twice. It was done October 2011 and 2014. Actually, I lied, there's a third one in 2018. That study asked the question to NASA asked the question on the scientific review, how many civilizations were there? How many collapsed? And what model were these civilizations running when they collapsed? Incas, Aztecs, Mayas, Greeks, Romans, Persians, early Mesopotamia, all of them came back. There was 32 civilizations, all of them collapsed. 5 out of those 32 collapsed because of disease, displacement, or disruption. All the rest collapsed because of ecological or environmental collapse. Basic infrastructure, roads, highways, sanitations, food, water, the basics, just Maslow's bottom of the pyramid, just the basic resources, that's why they collapsed. And then the second question was, what model were they running when they collapsed? Any guesses? They were all running a hierarchy model. All 32 collapsed running the same civilization operating system. A hierarchy system with one president, ruler at the top, peasants, slaves, laborers, and farmers at the bottom. All of them, all 32. And it doesn't matter which of those civilizations we look at, they all collapse running a hierarchy system, or even better said, it's a class system. Top class, middle class, lower class. But here's the interesting thing. The bottom of that pyramid was being held up by peasants, slaves, laborers, and farmers. And the most important thing to recognize of this is that they found out that none of the peasants, slaves, laborers, and farmers were indigenous to the civilization that collapsed. They were all taken from some other country, other culture, brought in, enslaved, And they knew that they would always be peasants, slaves, laborers, and farmers and never have buy-in to the system that they were building up. And that is a big thing that they think is why they collapsed, because you can't build up a civilization unless everybody has buy-in to the regeneration and the long-standing of that civilization. And that's why regeneration. If you look around the world today, you will see that absolutely everywhere you look. If you go to Dubai, if you go to that, where all the workers come from, the people who are building up these cities in the concrete jungles, or Qatar or Saudi, they come from Asia, they come from Pakistan, they come from somewhere else to build up that civilization on a work permit, on a visa. They live in a workers' camp. They send their money home. When the job's done, they have to go back or renew their visa or find another job. If you were to ask them, can you afford to buy this place that you're building up? Can you afford to live here? All of them would say no. We're running that same model. We're running it here in Switzerland. We're running it in the US. It's a class system, and that will always lead to failure. And that's why I just want to close to say the basics of human physiological needs are how we live life on Earth. And we need to meet those. And that means we need to get out of this hierarchy system. We need to get out of the ego where man or one person's at the top. We need to get into more an ecological view where we're in the center and think about the ecology of life, but we need to take it one step further, and that is seva, which is an old Sanskrit word which means regenerative, selfless service to all life, where we're all in love and harmony with each other together, and it's a journey that we're on here on Earth. And now I'd like to have Dina come up.
So I'm a regenerative brand and business strategist and multidisciplinary transformance artist. What do I have to do with this talk today about the game-changing power of regenerative economies? As a brand and business strategist, I get to consult most of all companies to transit from business as usual towards not only sustainable but regenerative business practices. Why? Because business is maybe the most powerful agent of change nowadays, not because only the money is there, but also because the decision-making paths are much shorter than in policy. And I've made the exercise, I've been in this for more than 20 years, and along with brilliant minds, we have realized, yes, business is maybe the most important agents of change. But how to make this transition faster, because we are facing a crisis, a poly crisis, as we know. And there is where the art and creativity comes, which I must say gets by the most of people misunderstood. When we speak of art, most of people think of the result of artistic activity, being painting, music, film, poetry. But actually what is most important is a process of artistic creation, where we go beyond the given constraints into a different way of looking for solutions. Because if we look for the solutions in the very same way, guess what? We will get the very same outcome. And one maybe even less communicated or thought of dimension, specifically in the realms like the World Economic Forum or economy, is the communications and entertainment realm. We'll come to that later. Brand and business strategy, regenerative brand and business strategy. It is a tool for designing desired outcomes. This is Martin Neumeyer, who is known as the godfather of branding. He is my mentor and very dear friend for many years. And what you see here on this image is the very personal copy of Steve Jobs. Martin Neumeyer has consulted Steve Jobs when he came back to Apple and has built the brand as we know it today. Why do I mention this? Just to tell to some of you who do not know who Martin Neumeyer is, to give him the credentials. But what is the basis of brand strategy? It's based on 3 questions. Who are you as a company or as an individual? What do you do? and why does it matter? This is the very famous talk about values and purpose. We all speak about that, business with purpose. We all need to have a purpose. But I argue about this even with Marty, try to bring this to the next level. I say, but Marty, it's not enough, because even the mafia have their own set of values and purpose. How does this help? We have to bring it a step further to have universal set of values which are life supportive and a higher purpose, again, to take the whole into account. I mentioned art earlier. I'm an artist, trained as an artist, and everything what I do, even consulting businesses, I do with an attitude of an artist. Why? Art means freedom, freedom of constraints. Art and artists are called not only to cross the boundaries, to break the rules. They're invited to do so, but they stay unpunished. Because art is not taken serious. In the best case, they get even awards for breaking the rules. But what's the specialty of this breaking the rules as an artist is that artist has kind of a quantum way to getting results. It creates experiences. And experience is much more powerful than thousands of videos. If one picture is more powerful than 1,000 words, experience is absolutely superior even to that. And art has the power to do that. I'll give you an ancient or a Renaissance example of disrupting the experience. This is, most of you would know, the altar wall in the Sistine Chapel, painted by Michelangelo himself. But what most people maybe don't know, this is now a detail, Michelangelo locked himself up in the Sistine Chapel for many, many weeks, didn't let anyone to go in, and painted all the dignitaries out of the Bible naked. Bear in mind, this is the time where the Spanish Inquisition was the most active. Therefore, the Church, the Vatican, hired another artist to paint over the nudity, but he had a very big respect for Michelangelo, only covered sparingly the bare parts. But Michelangelo dared to challenge the norm, to create an experience that encouraged then scientists of his time to do the same. Art has the power to provoke, to take something ordinary, like a pissoir, in a toilet. It will be useful for the gentlemen probably in this room. But in a gallery, people are confused, shocked, irritated. In any case, they do have a reaction, or at least have a question. So art can surprise. Like this famous example of Banksy, the real artwork was not the drawing in the frame, but the experience of shredding it at the moment when it was purchased for a very high amount of money. And art has the power to transcend. This is Marina Abramovic with her awarded performance at the Venice Biennale, where she did a performance immediately after the war in ex-Yugoslavia. Most of you might know this performance, where she transcended the pain of nations into an art piece. The power of vision. In order to get wherever we want, we first have to envision it. But it's not enough to have our own vision. We have to align in this vision. And here, being today at the World Economic Forum, with having the benefit of the world at our focus, at least as a declaration, I would like you to join me in one experiment. Just close your eyes for a moment and please think of your home. See it, how it looks like, what are the colors, what are the fragrances, sounds, who is there, how do you feel? Now please open your eyes and kindly raise your hand who had this image in mind. Look around, please, have a look. We have a problem. Being here at the World Economic Forum trying to find solutions for the global problems and do not experiencing Earth as our home in the first place, I like you to sit with that and don't forget this. So if we do want to build a boat, as Exupéry said, it's not enough to drum up the men. We have to give a vision that inspires everyone to move with all their powers towards the same North Star. Key factors of change, the one that we need so badly today, is speed and scale. Scale, but not only in terms of financing, scale in transformation. How can we accelerate the change? There are linear ways, and we have tried them all and haven't brought us to where we want to go. But science has luckily found out that it takes 400 repetitions to create new synapses in the brain through just memorization. But if we do this in a plate-based environment, guess what? We need only 10 to 20 repetitions. What do I want to say with this? I said earlier, we need to change the way how we look for solutions. Play is not much mentioned in environments like economy and politics. We take ourselves too serious. But then it takes us 400 repetitions and life is gone. We need to change the way we look at things. This is where the approach of art helps, approach of entertainment helps. And I mentioned this not only because of this, but also because 3.32 billion active gamers are worldwide active as of 2025. It is a huge economy, but it is also a chance to include generations across the board, from youngsters to older people, in a playful way, to envision, but also practice a new way of doing things. And now I pass on the baton and the clicker to our dear friend, Susana Pollack, who is the president of Games for Change, and she will tell you more about their mission.
Thank you very much, Dina. All right.
And I pass not only the clicker, but also the mic.
Okay, thank you. Oops. That's all right, thank you, Dina. And thank you, Marc, for having me here today. Hello, everyone. I am Susana Pollack, president of Games for Change. And before we start, I want to ask a quick poll in the room. I'm going to try to look out there. How many gamers do we have in the room today? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so about, I would say, 1/20th of the audience. But let me ask you this question. How many of you play Candy Crush, Scrabble, Go, Words with Friends, New York Times Connections, right? All of these games that you engage with on a casual basis include you in this family of gamers. And that is why there are over 3 billion people playing games across the world. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why games are so important to this conversation of impact, about regenerative economies, and how games can play an important role in making our world a better place. Games for Change over 20 years has grown alongside the video game industry with a strong belief that games can have a power beyond entertainment. Games can be drivers for real-world impact that we can see in our daily lives. I've decided I'm going to flip around this presentation, so each of you have about 10 seconds to close your eyes while I go really quickly to the slides that say, and I'm going to come back, to this conversation about open up. Why games? Why are we talking about games here at the World Economic Forum? It's not the normal place for me to do a talk about the power that games have, about the relevance it is to our culture, our kids. Sometimes we talk about the risks that there are within the gaming industry towards misconceptions that games can cause violence, that they're wasting our children's minds away. But there are so many positive things about games that we can embrace and we need to embrace as the most important form of media today. We talked about the number of size of gamers. that there are 32 billion or 33 billion. There is nearly, I think it's over 200 billion in revenue driving each year within the games industry. It's a $1 trillion economy. And for these size and scale, it alone sits as a form of media that needs to be addressed. But there are other reasons why games are an important part of this conversation. Where it sits within our culture. There is a point in which games are transforming or has transformed into the mainstream and are at this pivotal point, like other forms of media have been within its evolution, that can really inform, transform, and inspire society. Look at television. Any people in the audience here grew up with Sesame Street? I know I did, among the first generation. Well, Sesame Street came to be on public television because a revolutionary researcher named Joan Gans Cooney had this thought that if she could bring in television experiences in front of the most underserved communities, the young people, the young children who do not have the affordances, and their families couldn't literally afford to send them to a preschool environment before they enter the public school system, that they were sitting at a disadvantage. And because television in the late 50s and early 60s were becoming a main household staple, that she was able to convince public television to give her time on air. And through rigorous research, we have seen 50 years later that there are generations of young kids who have become early learners, and they're learning social emotional skills, they're learning early literacy skills, all before they enter in a kindergarten environment. There's another form of media in terms of comic books that we also saw a transformative part in our culture. Comic books were originally relegated to Westerns, then superhero and supernatural comics. But when Art Spiegelman came along and decided to demonstrate a retelling of the growing Nazi movement through a graphic novel, a visual format, it changed the perspectives, how you can use a visual storytelling technique in a very serious manner. He used anthropomorphized animals to play characters, to illustrate scenes that otherwise would really be difficult to see in this kind of medium. And you will see through Amazon books or bookstores around the world an entire genre now of narrative visual of graphic novel storytelling that helps illustrate some difficult topics. Feature films, Hollywood, Bollywood, and the international film scene, they've often turned to serious subjects to entertain, to inform within narrative storytelling. It's not a new concept, but it can be, if well done, be an investment that can be to deliver a significant return. It can inform, it can build awareness of people who may not otherwise come across these subjects. And we believe that games are at that point in our culture. Games are ubiquitous. They are sitting with the advent of cell phones in our hands. And we are seeing through the community that we've been a part of growing that there are many, many ways that games can improve our lives. This here is an example. I think I'll talk about it later, but in case I don't, Assassin's Creed, a very popular console game made by Ubisoft. It takes place in different points of history, and it is what you call a first shooter game in that the protagonist is shooting arrows, or if it's set in the Revolutionary War, it might be rifles, at adversaries, but it sits within different periods of time that are historically accurate. Ubisoft employs a franchise historian that ensures as much. And so we have a generation of young people who have grown up loving world history through this otherwise seemingly traditional game. And it got to the point where through some convenings that Games for Change were a part of, that Ubisoft decided to create an educational version because they heard of teachers trying to mod this game, try to change the game so they could bring it into the classroom and meet kids where they were. And now there are educational versions of this series that teachers are using around the world. Another perspective to look at this is how the games industry is now influencing culture, media, and you will see it everywhere. Television, you've got Netflix. Now they have a subscription to a gaming content because they know that gaming will drive a subscription model. Amazon games. Amazon, again, Prime Video, also has a gaming subscription model. Samsung, on their smart TVs, have installed games, smart games, within their platforms and even have interactive ads. Newspapers, the news industry, New York Times, the games page and game subscription. I don't know if this is really the time to celebrate this, but the games subscription at the New York Times is driving more revenue than the news. It's not a great state of affairs, right? However, New York Times knows that games are going to drive people to their platform, develop loyalty. I mean, I read the New York Times. I've got a regular subscription, thank you. But I do play New York Times games every morning. If you haven't tried Wordle, that's a great way to wake up your brain, though I really do like Connections. That one works for me. LinkedIn. LinkedIn games, same thing. Super casual games that you can play every day. Even TED now has games in development, right? So we are finding games everywhere. And in fact, I do think there was a session yesterday about how every company needs to develop a gaming strategy. You need to meet consumers where they are, and this is where they are. But once you do connect with your audience, your consumers, what can you do? What can games do other than entertain and relieve stress and connect you with friends? Well, we feel very strongly, and research has demonstrated, that games, the impact can come in many forms. There are games that can be used in classrooms, right? Games, teachers that are bringing games into an environment, meeting kids where they are, and giving them an opportunity to learn. Here we have Minecraft, the most popular game in the world, where there's a Minecraft education platform that is distributed through Microsoft 365 subscriptions throughout all schools, where they're subscribed around the world, where teachers can find curriculum within Minecraft, and lesson plans are developed. There's also a former U.S. Supreme Court Justice, Sandra Day O'Connor, definitely one of a hero of mine. Upon leaving the Supreme Court, her next initiative was creating a game studio. Why would a U.S. Supreme Court retiree create a game studio? Because she was frustrated that her grandchildren couldn't name the 3 branches of government, but they could name the 3 judges in American Idol. So she decided to meet them where they were. And now she has a non-for-profit organization that is part games studio and part transforming education, called iCivics. iCivics.org, and you can play very casual games in the classroom and outside about how to pass a law, about the branches of government. It does focus on U.S. Government and civics, but it's fun. But it is at the time, 15 years ago, revolutionary way to reach children. And now I think it's utilized in over 75% of middle schools across the U.S. Different from learning, which is what did I say? To transfer knowledge is building awareness. More generally, how can we raise awareness around the planet, around climate, about the refugee crisis? How do we develop empathy for people in different places? Through a game. Games allow people to step in the role of someone else's shoes. Unlike traditional media, where it's a sit-back experience, this is a lean-forward experience where the players have agency to change the outcome. And through that process, you very much are able to raise awareness and have people care and take action. There's a very fun game called Dumb Ways to Die that was originally produced by the Melbourne Transit Authority, and I won't torture you with the jingle that was created at the time, but it is a very fun games for impact. Don't have to be super serious. That engaged people around. In this case, it was nonsensical ways that you might cause your demise. Don't poke a bear. Don't put a fork in in an outlet. And at the end of the day, don't swim with piranhas. And at the end of the game, and at the end of the messages, watch the railway lines. Don't step into the train tracks. And it became viral sensation. It has spawned multiple games. You can buy plush toys, and it was light, but it got his message across. Oops, let me go back for a second. Can I go back? No.
The bottom is the back button.
Okay, sorry. No sneak preview. I'm very sorry. There, Paul. Okay, social movements. It can bring people together, right? Games like Pokemon Go got people outside, moving, engaging in their surroundings, and became cross-generational. Citizen science. Citizen science is using games to collect data for scientific research. And there's some fantastic work that even a UNDP has done along those lines. Nope, back again. Health and wellness. Games relax you, yes. They can bring down your heart rate. You can use biometric metrics to see that happen. And what we're seeing now in neuroscience labs across the country is that games can rewire our brain. They can help us manage otherwise mental or cognitive disorders. There is a game that was approved by the Federal Drug Administration in the US called Endeavor RX, and this game can treat ADHD in young people. Digital therapeutics is what that DTX stands for. So here's some of the many ways that games can have impact. Without going back to my earlier slides, because I'm really afraid I'm going to mess this all up, I just want to tell you a little bit about the work that we're doing at Games for Change and where we fit into this regenerative economies conversation. At Games for Change, we are a not-for-profit that, as I said, has grown alongside the games industry. We pride ourselves in building a community of practice that's cross-sector. That's why I'm so excited to be standing here at World Economic Forum and talking to you. We have a community, of course, game designers, game developers, publishers, but we also have a community of researchers and scientists, people in the healthcare industry, people in policy making, people in government. And we bring people together to help advance collaboration to allow games to be transformative. We work all over the world. We're based in the US, but we have chapters on every continent. And we work, over the next 5 years, we're going to be working strategically with different UN agencies on the road to 2030. We ran our very first Games and Sustainable Development Goal Summit 2 years ago in New York. And starting in April, we are going to be taking this model of inviting the games industry and change makers, different UN programs and organizations that are working towards the SDGs, and bring them together in convenings at different UN headquarters cities, starting in Nairobi in April, working with the UN Environment Program and UN Habitat. We're going to be moving on to Rome in October. We'll be working with the World Food Program and FAO with a convening around the World Food Forum. There are many UN agencies that have gaming strategies, and that's what we help them advance. UNICEF is working with focusing on well-being through designing toolkits for developers so they can design games for well-being in mind. The WHO is working with the games industry to help share information, health information through this distribution channel that are games. And in this regenerative economies conversation, games are relevant because the games industry, because we are driving economies. We are creating new economies. In Africa, one of the growing populations within the games industry is a big focus of investment, and which is going to be part of our focus in April. Games already, besides financial economy, they have a virtual economy with communities. Games are not only engaging players, but they're engaging communities of millions of people that come together because they share the love of games. Games are also systems, can help solve problems that are otherwise complex problems that are difficult to either convey to other people. You can break down ideas systematically into a game to convey that through play, or you can use game design as a design process to help unlock issues and help rethink complicated problems. And as we think about regenerative design within society at large, there are ways that this trillion-dollar games industry can also improve. We can participate in helping the industry to think about regenerative models that are thinking about long-term monetization strategies rather than short-term wins, that can help promote healthy social behavior within the games and reward that kind of behavior rather than leading with takedowns and this idea of a single player can win a game. So there are many conversations that can happen within the games ecosystem, and I really welcome the opportunity to engage with you if you're interested in learning more. We are an NGO. We work with all different organizations around the world, so please come check out one of our events, whether it's in Nairobi or Rome or New York City in July for our annual Games for Change Festival, and please join our community. Thank you. And now, last but not least,
Thank you so much.
fabulous Paul, thank you.
28.
This is the wrong presentation. Let me think. No, I think it's okay. All right. Sorry, I didn't get to preview my slides prior to this. So I am going to present to you something that I think is fundamentally important for your families, for yourself, for future descendants. I'm a mycologist. That means I study fungi. I specialize in medicinal mushrooms and in psilocybin mushrooms. So all habitats are infused with mushroom mycelium. When you see a mushroom, it's really, when you pick it, it's a portal into an underground vast network that's literally under every step that you take. And the mushrooms, some people call them the proverbial tips of the iceberg. The mushrooms are perishable. They rot in 4 or 5 days. The mycelium can literally live for decades, hundreds of years. And so here's a mycelium growing over 5 days. Now, if you saw that, and you paid attention, those were exponential expansion. So this is a life form that grows exponentially, and Marc described this. Mycelium represents rebirth, rejuvenation, regeneration, and regenescence. It is something that we can harness as a powerful ecological engine to make systemic change that can lead to a better future. I always like to give credit to my mentors, Dr. Michael Bugh, Kit Skates, Daniel Stuntz, and Alexander Smith. And I also like to give credit to, this is the wrong presentation, I think. I'm sorry. This is supposed to be a talk on immunity, and they're going to go into psilocybin mushrooms. So, but I can wing it. So, so my brother John, my mother, and my father were first got me inspired into science, etc. Is there any chance that we can change the presentation? Because this is going to go into psilocybin mushrooms. This is the wrong presentation. And there's a lesson for all presenters out there. Always work with the tech people. Always go back and always preview the material. So anyhow, just FYI. I want to give this talk on immunity and immune systems and how this can help all of you survive what I think is the next pandemic. Can we try that again? Pardon? He's going to try. Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, this will be a dexterous attempt on my part. So, I first got in the field of mycology because of my interest in psilocybin mushrooms. I published my first book when I was 23 years of age in 1983. And psilocybin mushrooms have been formative in being able to help me in my career and to help me in my creativity as a scientist. So, no, this is frozen. This is okay. For all you presenters out there, I hope you can relate, you know. The talk was immunity? Yeah, for pandemics, okay?
Tomorrow's the immunity talk. Today's the psilocybin.
Okay, all right, let me just wing this, okay? Let me have control again, okay?
You want to continue with this one?
Let's ask the audience. Do you want to hear about immunity or psilocybin? So everybody for immunity, psilocybin. Immunity or psilocybin? Raise a hand for immunity.
We can solve it today. You can hear about psilocybin, and you can come back tomorrow at 4 o'clock, and you can hear about immunity because it's fed in the system for tomorrow.
Okay, all right. Okay, we're back to psilocybin. Hey, I love psilocybin, so this is not a problem for me, okay? All right, so I've been involved in psilocybin mushrooms for a long time, and they've been formative in my life. And I would just love to have a show of hands. How many people here have had a deep journey with psilocybin mushrooms? Raise your hand. Okay, and obviously those people who have not raised their hands, you have not. So the two of you should talk, right? About half the audience, we're together here. Okay, my mistake, pardon me, you know, this has been a very busy day and very little sleep over 5 days. So my brother John went to Yale. He had amazing experiences in Mexico and Colombia. He inspired me, the youngest brother in the youngest one of my family, to be involved in psilocybin mushrooms. So can we have next slide? I just recently, this past year, published a new book, Psilocybin Mushrooms in Natural Habitats. It's a book that consolidates massive amounts of wisdom from my ancestors as well as my own research and from peoples all over the world, from Africa to India, etc. I dedicated my book to 3 great mycologists, Maria Sabina, Tina Wasson, and Kit Skates. So I think women have not had their proper acknowledgement for the key role that they've played in opening the door for so many scientists, and particularly in the field of psilocybin mushrooms. I had a DEA license. I was covered by it very early on. We did a number of conferences. It's hard to describe how paranoid we were to push the envelope here because psilocybin in the United States is a Schedule I drug. The United Nations passed a law also making psilocybin a Schedule I illegal substance, which means that it had no medical value, high potential for abuse, and high potential toxicity. Those 3 things are not true. So it hopefully be rescheduled to Schedule III in the next few years. I met Albert Hofmann in the course and gave him a copy of my book back in 1980. And these are some of my books, but as Terence McKenna really gets credit for the Psilocybin Magic Mushroom Grower's Guide, this book became really popular and taught people how to grow psilocybin mushrooms on grain with using simple kitchen techniques, oftentimes in closets. These are 3 species of some of the more than 220 species that have been published around the world. Psilocybe fabulosa, Psilocybe cubensis is the most widely used psilocybin species in the world, and then Psilocybe cyanescens. So I asked a researcher, how long ago did the psilocybin genes get first evolved in the fungal genome? And he said, well, we could find out. We have to do molecular clock analysis, very, very high-tech computers, a lot of data was crunched, but it would take money. So I funded it for $100,000, and we published this recently, and we found out that psilocybin was expressed in the fungal genome 65 million years ago. What an extraordinarily interesting time. So when you look at the historical records of herbarium samples around the world for almost 222 years, you'll see that it's spread all over the world. Now, the underrepresentations in Africa and in Russia It's not because they don't grow there. It's because of scientists did not make the collections. In Africa has the deepest history of the use of psilocybin mushrooms. But it's basically, is it recorded history or is it prehistory? Prehistory means before the written word. So the fact there's an absence of these reports here doesn't mean that they don't occur. It means there's an absence of scientists or written language. A lot of these traditions were oral. So I'll take you on a few of the archaeological sites of the use of psilocybin mushrooms around the world. Northern and southern Algeria, the famous bee-man figure, 7,000 years of age. Mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms, put into honey to preserve them because they rot in 2 or 3 days. And that's where probably fermented psychoactive meads came into existence. It's very much associated with the Bos taurus, which is the predecessor to the long-horned cattle. And so interesting in this Tassili plateau in southern Algeria, these mushroom-like figures, this bee-man is called, and the Bos taurus, or cattle, are linked very, very close together, just a few inches apart. And then in Spain, we have also representation of Bos taurus and what appears to be mushrooms growing underneath. I went on a tour with my partner, Dr. Pam Crisco, of temples in Egypt. And most people went inside with the tour guides, and my partner and I went mushroom hunting on the outside of the temples, and we found mushroom glyphs everywhere. And this is a particularly interesting one, and I want to give credit to other scientists who preceded me who first detected that these mushrooms were appearing on the reliefs. And this is the goddess Hathor in the Dendera temple, and there's a vase there with mushrooms growing out. And the other image you'll see is the blue lotus with mushrooms also co-occurring. So these are phenotypically accurate, taxonomically accurate descriptions of psilocybin mushrooms. The shape of them is very unique and very distinct. And mushrooms comes out of holes, like in the ground or in bags of plastic, or this is how cultivators grow. Mushrooms, emit out of the holes. So the idea is that these could be cultivated. Now, mushrooms cannot be collected by the common people. They are only reserved for the royalty. So what's curious is that Psilocybe cubensis, which is the species that we think was growing around that area, because of desertification now, these species are not present. But it's associated, the golden color of the mushrooms, the golden tops, as you saw in the previous images, and the water lily grows in ponds. Where do cattle go? They go to ponds to drink. So in collecting the blue lotus, you inevitably find also these magic mushrooms that are golden and bruised bluish. The lotus closes at night, opens up in the day. Mushrooms come up very quickly. So the concept of birth and rebirth was intimately tied. And here's the falcon sitting upon a mushroom. And so we found mushroom glyphs all over the temples. We visited 10 temples along the Nile, and we found mushroom glyphs everywhere. I showed it to an Egyptologist, and he says, "Don't be silly. These aren't mushrooms, they're shovels." Well, shovels wouldn't, there'd be a other direction. And then clearly, this is an example of if you're detached from the ecosystem of the culture that you're studying thousands of years ago, then you can miss what is obvious to us other scientists. We go to India, and this is also a phenotypically accurate depiction of Psilocybe cubensis. And Psilocybe cubensis can be grown in great quantities, extremely sustainable. The cost of growing Psilocybe cubensis is less than that of portobello mushrooms. So a pound of mushrooms is 454 grams. You dry it down to 45 grams. A hero's journey is 4.5 grams. So you get, for 10 cents, you get a paradigm-shifting, potential magical experience. Incredibly inexpensive, scalable, sustainable, and you'll see, I think, extremely useful. And the Roslin Chapel in Scotland, also, we found these reliefs that look very much like the mushrooms that grow around the Roslin Temple, Psilocybe semilanciata. So we jump into what we call the New World. It wasn't really new, but this is what we call it. And then we look at the codoliths, the descriptions in the Spanish Codex, where they brought priests over who actually recorded and wrote down the experiences of the indigenous use of psilocybin mushrooms, in this case, sahugun. And they describe the mushrooms very specifically, very similar to that of how people today describe it, giving them visions, being able to contemplate and to go on deep spiritual journeys. And then recently in Oaxaca this past year, I traveled with our friend Joe Torres, Latorre, and we found a Catholic cross from the 1500s. Remember, Spanish conquistadors came in the early 1500s, 1507, 1509. A few decades later, when the Catholicism spread throughout Mesoamerica, then in the base of this cross are then also accurate descriptions of psilocybe mushrooms that are codified at the base of the cross. Again, skeptics said, those aren't mushrooms, they're spears. Well, or they're bolts, stakes that are used to hang Christ on the cross. Well, spears aren't collected in a basket. The mushrooms are joined at the bottom, and the other mushroom reorients itself. So this is clearly another example of psilocybe mushrooms that are being depicted. So psilocybe zapaticorums and cereulescens are two of the species most used frequently in Mesoamerica and Mexico and Guatemala, going into Peru. And it was when this magazine, Life magazine, came out in 1957 with R. Gordon Wasson and Tina Wasson's journeys to Oaxaca, and they met Maria Sabina, who turned them on to the sacred use of psilocybin mushrooms. But this is the point that I want to bring contemporaneously today. There's been a long history of the use of psilocybin mushrooms. It's been suppressed by religions and invasion of foreigners for all the reasons that are quite obvious. But something that's happened today that's really interesting is there is a convergence and cooperation between indigenous people and scientists. And it's come to be known as two-eyed seeing, where you have the traditions of indigenous people being combined with modern technologies and scientists. And when Moderna and Albert Marshall were confronted by one of their tribal members, why should I have my children educated in a Western school? They came up with two-eyed seeing, because with two eyes, you can see much more clearly than with one. All traditions have benefited from advances in modern technologies. So psilocybe cyanescens is very popular. It grows here in Switzerland. It grows throughout Germany. It likely has migrated from the Pacific Northwest, and it was brought over when the Kew Gardens, who first described it, a scientist there in 1946, they brought over rhododendrons, azaleas, and trees. Ulmus rubra, the red alder, was not endemic to Europe until it was brought over by people visiting North America. And just as likely, Psilocybe cubensis probably came over the conquistadors and the Spanish when they brought cattle. So this idea of movement of Psilocybe species accompanies human migration. So Psilocybe cyanescens is one of the most potent species in the world. It grows in Washington State, Oregon, Northern California. It's very easy to transplant plant the mycelium and to be able to grow it in new habitats. So here is a wood chip pile of red alder, and there is my partner Pam. You can see she's very happy with her little patch. And look at all these psilocybin mushrooms. There is way more than enough for all of you here. And it's easy to grow. You don't need a laboratory or a pressure cooker, et cetera. Psilocybe mushrooms can also co-occur with deadly poisonous species, so this is why you need to be skilled if you're collecting these in the wild. I recommend no one here ever buy a dried mushroom a wild mushroom product purportedly that containing psilocybin. The very strong possibility you could co-mingle it with a deadly poisonous species. This has happened. People have died confusing the two. You need to know what's called the chain of custody of where the mushrooms were collected. That's why psilocybin mushrooms that are grown are much more safer than those that are wildly collected, unless you're an expert. Liberty caps is one that grows in southern Chile, grows here in Switzerland, grows in Italy, in France, and Norway. It also grows in South America. So it's a very easy species to identify because it has a nipple on the top and a very long stem. But now I just want to review a few of the studies that bring us into current times. And this is a game changer for society, is that statistically significant reduction in criminal behavior. If these were prisoners who were surveyed, and if they had one experience with psilocybin mushrooms, statistically significant reduction in the crimes that are listed here. When you look at partner-to-partner violence, it turns out that psilocybin and LSD, if your potential lover or your lover had one experience with psilocybin or LSD, they made better partners. There was a reduction in the potential for violence. I always thought you put this on a dating app. Have you ever tripped on psilocybin mushrooms? Yes, you can move right. No, you move left. This could be put into a game. I can see potential here. But anyhow, it could be your secret power in your gaming or something like that. Association between opioid use and psilocybin mushrooms. Psilocybin was the only one that associated with a reduction in opioid use. Think about that. We've all have been affected by people addicted to opioids, and it's been devastating to society, devastating to families. And my family has been personally affected, and I would think that most of you have also know family members or friends of family members who've suffered from this. And then in terms of nature relatedness, and this is where I'm going, psilocybin mushrooms increases your attachment to the earth and attachment to nature. And so what happens for those of us who've taken psilocybin mushrooms, you really feel like you're part of the natural world. You can relate more to ecosystem protection, to managing, your lifestyle and your practices to be more in coordination with the health of the ecosystems as opposed to exploiting and extracting them. So as it turns out that 8 million Americans surveyed in 2023 admitted to taking psilocybin mushrooms. 8 million Americans who admitted. There was probably a lot more than that. So I checked just the other day, and 263 universities and institutions have been registered at clinicaltrials.gov for doing clinical trials on psilocybin. So anyone out there is a skeptic, realize that they went through IRB boards, institutional review boards, to see, number one, if it was safe. Number one, is it addressing a medical need that current medicines are not addressing. And number three, whether it is the science supports the research. This is by many scientists on these IRB boards approving this. 263 clinical trials as of today at clinicaltrials.gov for a wide assortment of treatments: alcoholism, PTSD, anxiety, all the addictions that I had mentioned. And mushrooms, in terms of looking at drugs that have been used, commonly, with alcohol being the serious potential harm to society and the individual, mushrooms barely even registered. The LD50 of psilocybin mushrooms is more than 42 pounds. You can't consume 42 pounds of mushrooms. The LD50 is a lethal dose of something you take that would kill 50% of the people. They're some of the least toxic drugs ever analyzed. So they don't deserve to be on Schedule 1. They aren't toxic. Many states in the United States have applications for legalization or decriminalization. Colorado and Oregon are the most significant. And then we also know that it's being in New Mexico by prescription they have. But this is a rise up of the people. What's happening in the cities, the municipalities. I've been to several of these city council meetings. 10-1 oftentimes votes. When they see the science, the scientists present, they decriminalize psilocybin to the lowest priority of law enforcement. That's really important to know. They don't actually legalize it, they just decriminalize it. So it's a waste of law enforcement time and money if they're drag somebody into court for growing or possessing psilocybin mushrooms. So they lowered it. Very clever legal strategy. So the big question oftentimes, even though 8 million Americans have used psilocybin mushrooms, 99.999% have used them in a natural form, as a mushroom. All the clinical trials you saw, with the exception of about 8, are using the molecule that was synthesized by Albert Hofmann in 1958. So a naturalistic survey from Johns Hopkins also found that there was a benefit in the sense of well-being, cognitive flexibility, et cetera. Dr. Pram Crisco and I are co-authors with others comparing the experiences of patients in her program, Reach to Thrive. I recommend that you look this up. It's a fantastic program. But they were able to compare the molecule versus the mushroom, and the results were the people who had used the molecule versus the mushroom preferred the mushrooms. It was less chemically, pharmaceutically, and they felt it was more beneficial. This is the root problem of trying to do clinical trials with psilocybin mushrooms. How do you have a placebo-controlled experiment? And Dr. Pam Crisco brings up the fact that it's unethical if you're suffering from depression to give somebody a placebo. Their depression increases because they thought they were going to get a medicine and they didn't get the real thing. So, depression, we don't need another study. And this has gone through phase 3 now, that psilocybin decreases depression. It's competing with SSRIs. And in this study from Yale University, 2 psilocybin trips, 1 year later, 67% of tobacco users were tobacco-free. Think of that. All of us know tobacco cigarette addicts. 2 experiences, 4 to 6 hours, and you're tobacco-free. Can all of you tobacco smokers afford 4 to 6 hours? Your life will extend. You're less likely to get lung cancer. Everything else that's associated with tobacco use, you know, a whole industry that is predicated upon making people, their customers, addicted. You know, what's the morals in that? So binge drinking of alcohol also statistically significant. But this is the studies, and we're coming up to what I think is really significant, is that antidepressant drugs like SSRIs bind to TrkBs. These are receptors that activate on cells to create neurons. And it turns out they're called BDNFs that activate brain-derived neurotropic factors coming from TrkBs. Psilocybin docks with those receptors 1,000 times of a higher affinity than that of SSRIs. This is a threat to a multi-hundred-billion-dollar industry is using SSRIs. And it's in a natural form that's been proved over hundreds of thousands of years. So this is just an example of what happens with psilocybin. It increases neuroplasticity. It creates alternative pathways that actually cause dendritic spikes to fork and grow, and they touch, and you have what's called synaptogenesis. You have a new neural pathways to be able to help you. So now there are studies, for the first one in 2025, for Parkinson's patients, for which there is no cure. Now there's a common theme here that you're seeing, and it's all related to the health of your nervous system. Everything I'm speaking about to you today is related to the health of your brain, your ability to perceive. It's to your neurological health. And so the docking of these receptors, we found that when you combine psilocin and niacin, then you end up having a greater expression of these BDNFs that lead to new neuronal growth. So we have found synergy. No activity with psilocin at these microdosing levels, no activity with niacin. You combine both of them, and you have the maximum calculated value. You have true synergy. So we see niacin as a way of enhancing this. Another very popular mushroom is lion's mane. So I decided to combine all 3, and the lion's mane mushroom, this shows these nerve cells growing new dendritic spikes versus the control. And this is over, I think, 5 days. So it's a very, very quick stimulation of neurotropic growth. So now looking at cognitive impairment with Alzheimer's, there are several studies showing lion's mane mushroom helps. Okay, I want to try to finish up here.
I have an idea, Paul.
What's that?
The idea is the reason I asked Paul to speak is I wonder if you know what economies Paul is touching on. Alcoholism, drug addiction, health, domestic violence, abuse. Psilocybin mushrooms make nicer people. And Paul says it better than I do, so if you can...
Well, I mean, this is. I want to just... Can I have 3 or 4 more minutes, okay? Think about the reduction in crime. Think about the prevention of addicts. Think about the cost of the court system, the law enforcement, the families, the societies. Psilocybin, I think, will go down in history as the most significant rediscovered molecule in the history of medicine. Psilocybin should be made, therefore, free for all citizens in the world. The return on investment makes economic sense. You know, this is something that has no addiction potential. People who use the psilocybin mushrooms don't want to use them again for a year. You can't get addicted on something you're using once a year. But this is such a phenomenal game changer for society. It's something that I think we should really incorporate. So unfortunately, I am out of time. We do have a crisis in creativity. I want to take the last minute to show you something that was a huge epiphany. We all know, and Marc spoke to it, the Big Bang happened 13.8 billion years ago. And the Earth coalesced out of stardust, you heard this before, 4.5 billion years ago. And the Earth formed, when it formed 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth began to cool. But many of you may not know that our moon came from a collision with another planetoid, 4.5 billion years also. It slammed into the Earth, and then the moon formed. So 13.8, birth of the universe, 4.5 birth of our Earth and the moon. 4.3 billion years ago, the LUCA, the last universal common ancestor. But what happened just recently is fundamentally revolutionary in understanding the life in the universe. In 2016, a probe was sent to this asteroid outside of Saturn. It landed, it came back with rocks in 2023. In 2023, they analyzed November, they released the data. 4 amino acids for DNA were found on this asteroid that formed before the Earth formed. This is 4.6 billion years old, more than 100 million years older than the Earth formation. The most remarkable thing, they found tryptophan. Tryptophan is one enzymatic step away from tryptamine. Tryptophan liberates carbon dioxide with an enzyme and it finds tryptamine. Serotonin is a tryptamine. Psilocybin is a tryptamine. These are consciousness molecules. We are very likely to find psilocybin, serotonin, tryptamines throughout the entire universe. This speaks to what many of us feel from these psilocybin experiences is tapping into the universality of being, that we are all connected. We will find fungi on other planets. We will find animals. We will find plants. These are consciousness molecules. The universe and nature is conscious. We need to tap into the wisdom of universal consciousness, and psilocybin is a portal to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
You are proud. No, you are proud.
And to comment on this last slide, which you see here on screen, it's One Earth, the Global Regenerative Development Alliance that we started in order to unite the world around the vision about the one and only Earth. So thank you very much, and see you tomorrow at 4.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for our guests and partners for this mind-widening session. We now make space for the next session in the theater, but please do stay with us in the foyer. There's a good food bar with plant-based food and beverages. And as you heard, there's another session on this topic tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.